All right. So, Leslie, it's so good to be with you here in our respective studio environments. And, one thing that we wanted to get together and talk about is there's something interesting between us because we have some very different worlds that we're coming from, but there's a lot of convergence of these worlds and a lot of kind of similar interests in kind of the biggest questions of life and sort of ultimate meaning and value and that sort of thing. So this is just an opportunity for us to get to share kind of spontaneously what we're passionate about and envision something coming together where we can synergize our respective passions and professions too, right? So this is where our kind of worldviews meet our professions and our vocations. So it's an exciting prospect that that coming together we can do something that's meaningful potentially, right? So
Mhm.
maybe to get us started, we can just share. Maybe I'll just mention how we know each other. We lived with each other in a group communal house back in 2022, I believe it was, and for 6 months before we had to close the house and go our separate ways. But I remember back in whenever it was when you were doing your ecotherapy program, you used me as a guinea pig to practice on, right? And I remember it very vividly. It was a very powerful experience. You brought me into the Tilden Regional Nature Area, or whatever it's called, Tilden Park here in the Bay Area. And you did it in a way that wasn't just a casual afternoon hike, right? It was therapeutic, but it was actually more than therapeutic. It was spiritual in a sense, right? It was deeply it touched some profound places in my heart. And I remember, we even before we entered, you kind of paused before we entered and invoked sort of a ritualized, invitation and almost like request from the forest that we enter and we commune with the forest, right?
Mhm.
And then we went to a place and you kind of invited some inquiries as I started walking with you, questions about life, and also you invited me to kind of take everything in a way that I wouldn't normally if I was having a casual afternoon hike. And
Mhm.
then you invited me to find some place in the along the hike that was particularly attractive that I wanted to pause and have a little process around. And every time I go by that same tree, I I kind of return to that experience a little bit
Mhm.
where I was, you kind of invited me again to take in all of the sensations of the experience and then drop a question into the space and then listen to, in that case, it was the tree for response. And in that particular time, I was kind of struggling a little bit with what am I here to do? And, I'm getting older and how do I make sense of all that? And I remember just getting this sense of depth and power and strength from the tree and almost like a reassurance, like, as you continue to grow, you will provide shade for others to grow, right? This sort of metaphor that the tree was offering to me. And so
Mhm.
that stuck with me. And ever since, I've been really curious about your work and about your worldview. And I know that we've met a few times to discuss potential synergy between those two. And so, yeah, that's just something that I'm reminded of as we start our
Mhm.
conversation. So maybe did you want to share a little bit about what that world is for you, the ecotherapy, and kind of what that was all about, or however you want to start this conversation?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you for initiating this conversation, and thank you for being my friend and being a guinea pig in my training process. Um, that was very special for me too, to step into that with someone who I trust so much. Um, And just wanted to say, as you were talking about how we know each other living together, I remember in the basement where we both lived, kind of having one of our first deeper conversations, and you were sharing about your journey and the different places you were kind of called to live and work, and your kind of spiritual path as well. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, like there's a kindred spirit here, and I look forward to where this relationship takes us. So glad to be in this iteration of our connection. Yeah, and feels really good to collaborate and find where we connect and where we come together. And I think that's really a lot of what ecotherapy is about, and kind of eco spirituality is about connecting, or the type of practices I do is kind of under the umbrella of nature connection practices. So reconnecting, a lot of us in the kind of Western world have, sort of the modern world, have lost our inherent sense of connection with nature, even though it's always there. But through a lot of processes in colonialism and industrialization, and the whole way that our kind of economies have grown and the ways that we live modern life, there's been a real severing to our connection with nature, or just our understanding that we are nature and we are part of it, and we have an integral part of the whole in the ecosystem. And so a lot of cultures around the world and a lot of indigenous peoples are very much still like aligned with this and understanding this as just normal. But a lot of folks in this area and in the world that I grew up in, we have forgotten. But we all have that somewhere in our lineage, people who have been in relationship with the earth and who have been, understanding that we are dependent on the water and the soil and the sun and the air, and we're dependent on each other as humans. And with the more than human world, all the animals and plants and everything here is we need each other, and we are dependent upon each other. So to remember that, and to live in relationship and in connection. And so ecotherapy is kind of this sort of comes from eco psychology, which is from the sort of Western psychology lineage, but it's very connected to a lot of earth-based practices from many cultures all over the world, in terms of coming home to our bodies, coming home to earth, coming home to each other. So there are a lot of different practices that can cultivate that reconnection, that remembering, that we are members of this human community. We're members of this great ecosystem, this mystery and wonder of life. And it can also, I think, so that's part of the greater container and vision, is a sort of like a very deep form of healing and reconnection. And it can also be part of people's individual healing journey when it comes to trauma or grief, or whatever that they're working through that you might go to therapy for. You can bring that into relationship with the more than human world. Or even if it's not like something you go to therapy for, but maybe it's just something that you are growing into, or questions that you have, or kind of like we did in that exercise. It could be for anybody, just a way to know yourself better. And I think one of the ways that we're finding some synchronicity is around the finding your purpose, or kind of learning about yourself, and how your unique gifts, your life experience, can be a part of this much greater story, in terms of the human community and just the story of nature and life on earth, to see ourselves within that context, and that our work, our purpose, our efforts can be aligned with life and aligned with health. And so yeah, it seems like some of there's like a bit, or a pretty big portion of the kind of unique self coaching and frameworks that you're trained in and work with that is deeply about that exploration, that kind of uncovering, and allowing that to emerge and step into it more fully. So I don't know
Yeah.
if you can share more about that, your passion around that work, or how it connects to kind of the nature connection aspects.
Yeah, totally. And there's so much in what you said that I just kind of want to double click on. So maybe to weave this all together a little bit is one thing that I find fascinating, and you can correct me if I'm off on this, but Western psychology typically is a frame of reference where you go into a room and try to work out the problems of the sense of self, right? Like I have um, issues with my family, so I got to kind of retell the story and kind of work out what happened. But ecotherapy is different in that you're actually inviting the self to heal from the very fundamental, like a root disconnection from the cosmos, from nature, from reality. And so you're not necessarily, I mean, certainly, people bring up specific issues that they're having, but it's not about necessarily fixing something that's wrong, but inviting the connectedness that is inherent in all of reality that we've actually lost connection to heal based on just that connection, right? That's like when we tap into who we really are, it actually is healing,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
and so that's something that we're in the unique self emergence process or the unique self framework which you referred to. It's all about asking the question of who am I, right? Because in the modern era, as you mentioned, we've developed this sense of self where it's all about kind of achieving my dreams and doing what I want to do. And I got to pull myself up by my bootstraps and kind of got to compete and win over the competition, right? And I have to do it all myself. And I have to struggle to strive and push myself, right? And not that there's anything inherently wrong with any of that stuff, except that it's only partially true.
Mm,
It's like we certainly have an individuality, and we certainly can take steps, and we have our own desires and our needs and capacities and strengths and agency and all that. But it's not separate from everything else. It's not separate from nature. It's not separate from each other, right?
mm,
And so the the unique self framework is actually what it's inviting us to remember, as you use that phrase, is who we really are is connected with all things. But we don't just stop there. It's not just we're one with all things, kind of let go of yourself and let go of your story and let go of your needs and desires, and it's all ego and all that. It's actually when we reconnect with our essential intrinsic connectedness, right? That you're talking about and helping people to do in nature, ecotherapy or eco spirituality. Then we can tap into the unique desires and the unique perspective and the unique capacities that emerge from that connection, right?
mhm,
Um, and so just more specifically, the unique self-emergence process actually walks a participant through this understanding that, oh, we're typically stuck in our ego. That's the nature of most modern humans, is that we think that our thoughts are what's real, and we kind of have our contractedness and all the things I described about modern era. And it helps to disidentify with that ego so we can actually see it. Oh, I have these tendencies. Oh, I have these thoughts and contractions and pettiness and all that stuff. But then it brings us into a recognition of what we call true self, which I think there's ways in eco spirituality that I love the way you frame that. So maybe we can come back to that of like, what do we when we talk about kind of connection, what do we call that, right? But we in unique self, we call it true self. It's the connection to all that is. And then we move to once we find our essential connectedness, what is my deepest heart's desire? What is my unique set of gifts? And what is needed around me, right? So it's not that oh, I desire world peace, so I'm gonna do everything for world peace necessarily. It's what is my unique desires and my unique gifts that I can give in my circle of influence, right? My unique circle of influence, right? And we all have something to give. We all have something
Mhm.
that's needed of us. And that's just not just made up, and it's not just the egos wanting to be, relevant. It's actually a deep intrinsic truth that we're called in a sense for, called to become from reality or from nature itself.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of
Yeah.
the things that I remember in the last retreat that you did was and you can jump and sorry if I interrupted you, but the last retreat you did was one of the things, one of the parts of it was we went for a nature walk, but we asked a question, and the question was something like, "What is mine to do?" or "What is my response?" or some. I can't remember the exact question, but like, basically, what am I called to do in response to the first part of the retreat, which is grieving a lot of the grief that's needed to be grieved at this time in the world. All the war, the violence, the eco destruction, climate change, all of that, right? And I remember feeling so much more able to access the response to that question when I was surrounded by this natural place where each tree has its unique gifts to give to each, to its niche in the forest, right?
Mhm.
And there's no extra in the forest. Everything serves some purpose or multiple purposes, and
Mhm.
it's all a growth ecosystem where the common denominator, the common purpose is growth of all of it, more life, more wholeness, more, maturity, if you will. And I
Mhm.
just thought that was a beautiful place to have that kind of inquiry.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was very beautiful to be in the trees and the mist and the moss, and it's beautiful and soothing. And I think I don't know if there's any studies about this, but I've just sort of experienced this when you are in a natural habitat that is still kind of intact. I think there's something that happens to our nervous system, and there's a feeling of presence where we can tap into this feeling of interconnectivity and the like sort of pulse of life and the interdependence and the way that it's all working together. At least I experienced that. I mean, it's beautiful or like green or lush, or there's so much beauty in nature, but I think there's also something just that we get on some level just in our bodies that we don't feel that way when we're sitting in traffic. Like we
Right,
feel it when we're outside breathing the air, smelling the trees, hearing the birds and all of that. It helps us settle in our nervous system, and I think that's really helpful for being present and for listening and slowing down. And I really believe that we need to slow down to be able to listen and kind of take in some of the answers to these questions that we might have. And yeah, just to respond to one thing you were just talking about in terms of listening to our heart's greatest desire.
deepest heart's desire.
Heart's desire, yeah, that's beautiful. And it made me think of kind of in a sort of eco spiritual lens, the sort of listening to our heart's deepest desire, that the heart would be not just ours, right? The heart is sort of like the heart of the earth, of the cosmos, of humanity, of our kin. Could be listening to the heart of the trees or of the animals and what they might be needing. And I think that's really good for us as sort of egocentric humans, especially in the kind of Western world, this sort of tendency to be very individualistic and use things in the way we want to for our purposes without thinking about the implications of that. So to actually listen, because when you love someone, you listen to them. So when you love nature, when you love each other, you're going to listen deeply, and you have the sense of self is much bigger. It's like we're not just one person, we're connected to something much bigger. So our heart
Yeah.
is really big.
Yeah, I love that. And if we go down to our deepest heart's desire, and what we say in unique self theory is, yeah, like you're saying, the our deepest heart's desire is the desire of cosmos itself, right? And you keep going down deeper and deeper, deeper. There is the one desire, right? If we think about, and this is where unique self comes from, is evolutionary spirituality. If we look at how everything is one, and yet 14 billion years ago, as far as we know, something like that, there was the Big Bang. And at first it was just energy, and then it was matter, and maybe it just certain particles. It was like helium or something, right? And then as evolution progressed, that the forces brought together these galaxies, and the galaxies formed, and then there's solar systems that formed around stars. And then in our particular solar system, something like, I think, 6 billion years ago, right, the Earth was formed in a way that was precisely attuned for the emergence of life, right?
Mhm.
And so if we look at the desire of the cosmos, it was for life, right? And at that point, right? And so you have the biosphere and all the single cell organisms and the multicellular organisms. You have plants, fungi, plants, and then eventually out of the plant kingdom and fungi, you have the emergence of animals. And out of the animals, you have the emergence of mammals. And out of mammals, you have a particular mammal we call Homo sapiens, right? So the desire for the cosmos was life, and the desire for cosmos was conscious human life. And here we are, right? And and so like conscious human life over the past 200x thousand years or so developed in its own stages of development, more and more consciousness, more and more capacity, more and more technology. And of course, what we were starting our conversation with is that in the modern period, about 500 years ago or so, the Renaissance and the industrialization period started coming after that. We had so much technology actually outpace our ability to use it, right? And so we started to feel like we were so powerful that we didn't need the rest of the cosmos. Like we could figure out all the natural forces. We could actually taxonomize and divide everything into categories and study it and kind of, just do what we want with the earth and think there was no consequences because we were so powerful, right? And
Mhm.
right now we're seeing the limitations of this modern techno-economic, separate self system,
Mhm.
that all the things that we're destroying, right? And we're actually reaching the limits of the biosphere that actually enabled us to be here. And so
Mhm.
right now we actually, the cosmos continues to desire through us, and the cosmos desires for us to actually use our capacities, but now for a biocentric, human-centric, cosmocentric, living, flourishing, right? So it's interesting that your modality actually uses Western psychology for ecotherapy, right? So it's actually blending modalities of the Western scientific paradigm with the, indigenous and nature-based traditions. And
Mhm.
so the cosmos wants us to actually weave together the best of as many paradigms as we could, because that's the nature of reality. Everything is connected. So we wouldn't want to have split off paradigms that are actually disconnected from everything else. So, not that well, anyway, there's certain ways in which every, um, let's say therapeutic modality could continue to evolve to incorporate more ways of understanding the human. And our
Mhm.
friends are off. A lot of our friends go to the California Institute of Integral Psychology, Integral Studies, yeah, where it's
Mhm.
all about that, right? In many ways, it's all about saying like, how do we integrate the best ways of supporting human healing,
Mhm.
right? And not just the cognitive behavioral, which is part of what they do, but they have all these other therapies, dream therapy, gestalt therapy, You
Mhm.
know, I mean, I just hear about it because I live with them. But it's so fascinating because the cosmos desires, right? That through us, our deepest heart's desire is actually for more wholeness, more integration, more interconnectivity. And
Mhm.
that's what we're participating in right now.
Yes, we are. Thank
Yeah.
goodness.
Right. And so when we feel allured together, you know, when we feel allured to people that kind of think similarly at this edge of wanting to make something happen, like
Mhm.
you and me, we both come from different places, but there's some convergence, right? And there's an allurement to create something. And in evolutionary spirituality, we say that when two parts, like evolution is when two parts come together and form a larger whole. Like that's the whole evolutionary process is all about that. From subatomic particles coming together to form an atom, right? All the way up, right? It's just kind of when parts come together and form more complex, more intimate, more interconnected wholes, we get evolution. And so when you have two friends coming together, an ecotherapist and a coach,
Mhm.
then we have something that we can birth together.
Absolutely.
Something new. So we're participating in evolution right now. Kind of
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's the relationship, I think that's one of the things that we're remembering is the importance of relationship and the kind of the magic and emergence that can come from that we're limited on our own, but when we come together, that's when yeah, there's something else. It's just not just the two pieces put together. It creates like a third field in between the two. And yeah. And then when you
yeah.
bring in more people, then it expands even more. So I'm also very interested in coming together with community, with groups. I think that's another thing that our culture is desperately needing. If people are not already a part of some kind of spiritual or religious tradition, um, a lot of people are just don't have a way to gather with people. Um, and so that's been like a lifelong interest. That's part of the reason I ended up living in community with you. It's kind of like, how do we do this thing? How do we come together? And so that's part of my interest and kind of at the heart of these offerings or these community gatherings that I've started to kind of co-facilitate with people. And you had the idea of what about a retreat, kind of a opportunity that where we could kind of come together in community and kind of be with some of this like it deserves some time. I think it deserves some space and especially ideal to be outside in connection with nature and so yeah, that's part of our exploration of like what's emerging. Is this something that we could create together perhaps with others and then offer to the community and invite in that experience of deeper connection with ourselves, with the land, with each other, with our heart's desire, our own like piece of heart as well as the cosmic heart, and listening. I'm also really interested in us remembering how to listen and heed the call and answer the call and care for each other and for our kin on this planet while we can do the best that we can with our one precious life here and also thinking about the generations to come. That was a lot of different things, but yes, retreat possibility.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk about that. And it's, before we do, it's worth just pointing, double clicking on the generations yet to come. In a certain sense, not only are we at the deepest realization, we're one with all of nature, all of reality, we're also connected to past and future generations, right? And in a very it's a mystical kind of realization, but it's real. And we talk about ancestors kind of paving the way and sort of cheering us on in whatever way they do. And we also can think of those that come after us actually kind of praying to us, like, create a world that we can thrive in. Like, we need you to keep this thing going, but not just keep it going, but to continue the evolutionary process so we can come into the world and really thrive and know that we are connected, right?
Mm.
And we are loved and we have dignity. And so maybe we can talk about, what might a retreat like this look like? And maybe one thing that I'd just like to start off with is, what would we want people to experience or realize, or, kind of, it's not necessarily, it's interesting because it's not like, I almost want to say, what do you want people to get out of it? But it's kind of a strange question, right? Because
Mhm. Oh, I can't hear you. I think we're lost a little connection somehow. You can hear me?
you hear me now?
Oh, there you are.
No?
Yeah.
Okay. Back. Yeah, we're back. Okay. So I was just saying that this question of like, what do we want people to get out of it is in a certain sense a weird question because it comes from the same stance of sort of the separate self, kind of a transactional relationship where I pay something and I get something out of it. Now,
Mhm.
certainly that kind of quality is understandable, but it's almost like I would like to say it is like, how do we want people to emerge and what do they want? What do we want people to discover?
Mm.
Maybe that's a good question, right? And I like to think of it as I want people to discover more about who they really are and what they're here to do is
Mhm.
one good question or one good intention for this sort of event.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I appreciate your pause with, we're programmed in a certain way. And it's so important to have that pause when your gut's kind of like, wait a minute, that's not quite it. Because like, yeah, what am I gonna get out of it? It is sort of that like extractive thing that so many of us in our lineage have been socialized, programmed to do is like that I need to take, that I need to consume rather than, what can I give would be a different question too, which is kind of what we're getting at too. It's like understanding ourselves in the context of community ecosystem so that we can feel very supported in being able to give our gifts and receive the gifts of life and, from each other and everything. So that's maybe another question is like, and there's a lot of nuance to that too, because I also come from part of my personal work has been around how to be of service or how to give in a way that is actually sustainable and healthy for me too, and is not sort of like self-sacrificing or diminishing my essence or the true like gifts that I have to give in service of some other sense of what I should be doing or should be giving. So I think especially for women and people socialized as women, but a lot of different people of any gender, there's been some complexity around like, what does it mean to be of service? I also come from Christian traditions. I think a lot of people in different religious backgrounds where their service is the emphasis, that there can be some stuff to sort of unpack with all of that. But I do think it's still important to ask ourselves, especially in this highly individualistic, consumeristic culture, like what is mine to give? How can I be of service to my community and to our world? Because we need it, like we need it more than ever. We need everybody to be as alive and as grounded and as connected and as nourished as possible so that we can all do our part to, you know, to save each other, to save the earth in a way, like to preserve life, to survive, to continue the human legacy. Like we really need each other. We really need everyone to be engaged. So this is kind of a tall order for one retreat, but
I
I guess
know. But it's
you know,
within the context of, maybe many or, multiple people's own
yeah.
experiences, right?
So maybe this is like a, planting a seed for like this a sort of invitation into this kind of worldview, or invitation into some of these inquiries. I think also like a retreat, part of the intention is to like rest and maybe get out of your normal routine and come into relationship with the more than human world, or into relationship in community. Or I'd love to incorporate music, rhythm, good food, some of these things that help us to feel really human. So yeah, I guess it's sort of the intentions are percolating for me, but I think people will get a lot of different things out of it, or we'll discover probably a lot of different things, but there'd be an invitation to come home a bit more, I guess, like come home to our true nature.
Yeah, right. Because our true nature is reciprocity too, right? Like the nature of reality, as you mentioned earlier, is relationship, and relationships are give and receive. It's that's just that actually is how things are meant to be. And
Mm.
so it would make sense to consider it something that people show up and give to and also receive. Another thing to think about is you mentioned service and being needed. That's so important because if we look around us, we have an epidemic of meaninglessness, a pandemic of meaninglessness and depression even. You have a million suicides a year. It just rips my heart out. I just heard about one recently, and it's just like, oh my God. People feeling like their lives don't matter
Yeah.
and that they have nothing to offer and that there's nothing beyond them that makes any difference. And what we're saying, I think pretty emphatically is no, first and foremost, you matter as part of something larger, this entire field of reality that you're connected to, that it took 14 billion years to manifest you and me and every single 8 billion people in this earth, right? Like that's a masterpiece if I've ever understood one, right? Taking that long to come up with us, right? And so not only is it like we all are intended, we matter, but there's actually, just like in a ecosystem, there's something that is needed from us, that we're wired with gifts that are yet to be unwrapped, right?
Mm.
We're wired with sort of possibilities for giving to the needs around us. And it's not a mistake that that what we are passionate about, what we're capable of offering, actually we can find people wanting that, because that's just because again we are connected, right?
Mm.
And so there's actually an experience of realizing the intrinsic value of a human being in relationship to all other beings that actually is the source of our aliveness, right? The
Mhm.
source of our just to breathe. I mean, just feeling into that, it's just like, oh, wow. Like that's like, yeah, it's nourishing. It's exciting. It's enlivening, right?
Mm.
So I want people to have a glimpse, like to have this seed planted in their own experience of, wait a minute, maybe I do matter. Maybe I do have gifts to give. Maybe I am needed. And then walk away, with a little bit more of a sense of what is it that I'm needed for? And how do I matter? What is my unique quality of, Davidness, and what is Leslie-ness that the world needs?
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want people to discover a little bit of.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I'm right there with you. And as we're sharing and talking, I think this is a lot of kind of very big picture and, aspirational and hopeful, um, and as we continue to allow this work to emerge with us, between us, and listening, maybe part of our practice can be listening to what is needed of us, of this retreat. Or maybe people could even share, if people are listening to this, like uh what about these ideas are resonating, or what is needed, what is wanted, like where is there some some harmony or vibrational, connection, what's feeling alive. Because I think there's like so many different directions we could go in terms of focusing, and we'll consider, how much time we have, and to have enough space for joy and connection and eating together and resting, as well as some deeper exploration or maybe deep listening time with nature. So I think the nitty-gritty is definitely yet to be determined, but maybe as we're talking, I'm realizing, oh, maybe we need to listen a little bit, to get some guidance about like how to focus this a bit more, or yeah, like if there's maybe something in our unique community too, like where we live or on this land, or like, if there's something, or just in the world too, that is happening that we want to be in relationship with in some way, and how to, bring intention to that, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's right, and we certainly, I have certainly ideas of the specifics of how this could go, and I'm sure you do too. And we both have our respective kind of training and modalities and experiences and skills that we can fit into this. But I think to your point, maybe what we can do is we can invite people to actually share what they're needing and wanting with this regard. And then our next conversation, we can kind of dive into what the specifics might look like to try to tailor it to people's, desires. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, we can listen to people, and we can listen to, um, nature in other ways as well. So maybe we could talk about how to do that together or separately.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can even, um, how do you want to do that in another conversation, or we can maybe we can come back together then and for our next conversation to feel into what we're hearing, what
Yeah,
we're drawn to.
that sounds good.
Because I really, one of the things that in the unique self framework here that we work with in my coaching is listening, right? And listening to our what we call our original allurements,
Mm,
meaning when we first have a sense of being drawn to something, a lot of times, especially in our day to day, we kind of we just disregard it. It's like, oh, for all the reasons that our mind makes up about disregarding something, like, oh, it doesn't make any sense, or it's not practical, or I've got to find a job, or got to do this or that, right? Or people don't, it's not normal, or whatever it is, right? But to actually listen deeply about what's alluring, and I use the term alluring on purpose because it's not just attracting us, which is sort of it's more superficial, or it's not like an aspiration, or um, but like allurement is like an embodied, felt whole being
mm,
feeling drawn towards something.
mm,
And lately in the last couple of months, and actually on my 40th birthday back in August, which you were participating in, that was symbolically like the moment when I realized like I have something to offer that this world that I'm feeling called to offer. Like there's a calling that I can't that I need to I actually need to let it loose more. And this is
mm,
part of it is doing these kind of conversations and holding kind of events around sharing this worldview and this way of seeing things, and because it's really transformed my life in the last 13 years that I've been in it.
mm.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah,
So
I love that. There's a wildness to it too. That's like alluring. It's like
yeah.
tapping into that animal part of us. I mean, we're all of us as an animal, but just the kind of like casting off some of the layers of like, this is what I'm supposed to do or say, or how my life is supposed to look, but like tapping into that more raw kind of yearning, or if there's something that's yeah, alluring us and getting our attention to listen.
Yeah, right, because it is another feature of this modern separate self kind of world that we're living in that we talked about at the beginning is this sense of like the mind is reified as like the only thing that makes any sense and matters, and rational, being rational and um goal oriented, right? Sort of like the mind is it's mind over body. We hear that all the time. It's like mind over matter, right?
Mm,
Just sort of push yourself, push yourself, push yourself. And
mm,
what I think what you're suggesting and what I'm inviting also is this sense of actually engaging the body,
mm,
not as separate from the mind, but actually is just engaging it with the mind and with the entire being. Because ultimately none of it's separate. It's all interwoven. The mind, heart, body, soul, the whole thing, right, is all interwoven. So uh when we pretend like it's separate and think that, oh, it's just the mind that matters, we get all these pathologies and feeling
mm,
separate. And so,
mhm,
yeah, I love that. So that's allurement is like is a whole being feeling that incorporates the raw parts of us too.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's awesome. I'm looking forward to further conversations. And I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to hearing what other people say and share, and also what comes in our dreams and in our guts, and
Mm,
in our meditations and our eco walks and
mm,
journal entries and, you know,
mhm.
random reveries.
Yes. Yes. Me too. I'm excited.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks, David. To be continued.
Yes.